Welcome to our presentation on building a serverless web application using AWS Lambda, API Gateway, DynamoDB, React, S3, and CloudFront. This project will guide you through creating a scalable and efficient web application without the need for server management. Hi, I'm Lilian Coney, and this is my DevOps project. You can find more about my work at my portfolio site. Serverless architecture is a modern approach to building scalable and cost-effective applications without worrying about server management. This project demonstrates how to build a full-stack serverless web application using AWS services in React. The backend handles API requests with AWS Lambda, API Gateway, and DynamoDB, while the frontend is created with React and hosted on S3 with CloudFront for global accessibility. This guide will walk you through the entire process, from setting up the backend to deploying the frontend. By the end of this project, you will set up a serverless backend using AWS Lambda, API Gateway, and DynamoDB, create a React-based frontend for user interaction, deploy the frontend to AWS S3 and distribute it globally with CloudFront, and integrate the backend and frontend to create a complete serverless application. We will build a Todo list application, where users can add new Todo items through a React frontend, store and retrieve to-dos using API Gateway, AWS Lambda, and DynamoDB, and access the application through a globally distributed CloudFront URL. Before we start, ensure you have an active AWS account, AWS CLI installed and configured, Node.js installed on your local machine, a text editor like VS Code, and basic knowledge of AWS services, React, and the command line. The project consists of three main steps: setting up the backend, setting up the frontend, and deploying the frontend to AWS S3 and CloudFront. Now, let's dive into the project demo. You can follow along with the code available in the GitHub repository. Let's start with the backend setup. We'll configure AWS Lambda, API Gateway, and DynamoDB to handle our application's backend logic. First, we create and deploy our serverless backend using AWS CloudFormation. This involves writing a serverless template and deploying it to create the necessary AWS resources. Next, we configure API Gateway to expose our Lambda functions as RESTful APIs. This step includes setting up methods, resources, and permissions. We need to set the appropriate permissions for our Lambda functions to allow API Gateway to invoke them. This involves adding necessary IAM policies. We integrate API Gateway with our Lambda functions, ensuring that the API requests are correctly routed to the appropriate Lambda handlers. After configuring and integrating, we deploy our API Gateway setup to make our APIs accessible. This step finalizes the backend setup. We test our Lambda functions to ensure they are correctly configured and can handle the expected requests and responses. We attach the necessary IAM policies to our Lambda functions to grant them the required permissions for accessing other AWS resources like DynamoDB. We verify our backend setup by checking the logs and ensuring that all components are correctly configured and functioning as expected. Finally, we complete the backend deployment by ensuring all resources are correctly set up and our API Gateway is deployed with the correct stage name. With the backend in place, we move on to setting up the frontend. We'll create a React application that interacts with our serverless backend. We start by creating a new React app and installing the necessary dependencies. This step sets up the foundation for our frontend development. We start by uninstalling the old version of React and React DOM to ensure our environment is clean. Next, we install the latest versions of React and React DOM to keep our project up to date. We proceed by installing Axios, a promise-based HTTP client, to handle our API requests. Additionally, we install Web Vitals to measure the performance of our app. Our serverless frontend has successfully compiled, and we can now view it in the browser. Here is our serverless Todo app, ready for us to add new tasks. We can now see our added tasks displayed in the app. In step 3, we deploy the frontend to AWS S3 and CloudFront for hosting. We create an optimized production build of our React app, preparing it for deployment. We then create an S3 bucket to host our front-end files. Next, we sync our build files to the S3 bucket, making them available online. We configure the S3 bucket policies to ensure proper access and security. We create a CloudFront distribution to serve our app with low latency and high transfer speeds. Our CloudFront distribution is successfully created, providing a domain name for our app. Our serverless Todo app is now live on CloudFront, accessible via the provided URL. We can see our tasks in the live app, demonstrating its functionality. In conclusion, using AWS services and React, we've built a robust and scalable serverless application. Thank you for watching.